Here's a name you've heard a few times. Mason Tvert. Currently and seemingly, as always, of the MPP. Had a great time talking to Mason about, what brought him to activism in the first place and how he's had success in the space. Very enjoyable conversation. So here we are. We've got Mason Tvert in the flesh, at least for me. How's it going?
It's going well.
I feel like, having spoken with as many people as I've spoken with who have brought up your name in a positive light, I should say thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you.
Do you, Mason Tvert obviously had a hand in writing the legislation, had a hand in making sure that Amendment 64 got passed. Correct me when I'm wrong.
I'm not really as involved when it comes to the drafting. I certainly get to listen in and participate, but generally that's left to the folks with the law degrees and so on. I get to be the pretty face in front of the camera and to really work on trying to change the way people think about marijuana so that they'll support these laws.
There you go. And so that you certainly are and were and have been and will be and do. So we're going to talk about what's on your desk now, but we're going to wait until the end. We're going to talk about what your thoughts are about what's happening now. We're going to wait until the end. We're going to do the whole Amendment 64 thing. That'll probably come up in the middle. What we want to establish first is, where did this sensibility come from? I thought you were a Northeastern guy, but you just debunked that myth. You're from Arizona.
That's right. I'm from Arizona. My family's actually from Ohio originally and moved to Arizona, and that is where I grew up and graduated from high school prior to moving away and going to college and then relocating to Colorado shortly thereafter.
And was it, how much of it was, I want to move to Colorado, and how much of it was conversations with Rob Campea saying, hey, maybe a good idea is to move to Colorado?
Well, it was actually more so my relationship with Steve Fox. Steve has been my mentor and really was the one whose idea it was for me to come to Colorado. So shortly after I finished school, I was hired by the Marijuana Policy Project to work on some grassroots campaigns, basically harassing members of Congress who were repeatedly voting against medical marijuana related legislation in Congress. And that ended after the 2004 election. And I was looking for a job and was talking to Steve, and he had this idea for really focusing on marijuana being safer than alcohol and really just a new theory for how to change marijuana laws. And he thought that I might be someone that could carry out his dream campaign. And so he asked me if I would consider moving, and we talked about multiple places. We talked about Colorado, but we also talked about Wisconsin, which is another state where there's a lot of alcohol-related activity going on, and ultimately decided on Colorado. I mean, I don't know how you want to go about this, like getting into the whole story of this. That might be kind of a hanging narrative there with
Wisconsin, or
do I have to wear these?
No, you don't.
I'd rather.
Yeah, then put them down. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, he had this idea for approaching marijuana policy reform in a new way, and it really centered on discussing marijuana's relative safety compared to alcohol and focusing on that. And the reason that we looked at Colorado is because there wasn't a whole lot going on here in terms of reform activities. The state had a medical marijuana law, but there wasn't a big effort underway to move things forward. And there had been some alcohol-related incidents that had gotten a lot of national news coverage and on college campuses. And so it made sense to do this new project talking about marijuana being safer than alcohol in a place where alcohol was a big deal and really in the news.
Right.
And Colorado was one, and Wisconsin was another.
Right.
Because the original idea, the pilot project for SAFER, which became to be known as SAFER, was to go to college campuses and really get students talking about marijuana being safer than alcohol and how they shouldn't be punished for making the safer choice and so on.
Yeah.
And so we decided Colorado made sense, and boy, am I glad about that.
Yeah, it turned out to be a pretty good call.
Yeah. I mean, even if, things went the same way in Wisconsin and marijuana was now legal there, I don't think it'd be as nice as it is here in Colorado.
Oh, yeah. It's also beautiful and wonderful here. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of beautiful and wonderful places, let's go back and make sure to dot the line to Colorado. We did it quickly. Let's do it more slowly.
Sure.
So Arizona, what was it like growing up in Arizona?
Arizona is a very nice place, and it was nice growing up there, but ultimately it's just not the scene for me, in terms of my interests. I'm very into live music and, the type of stuff that's going on in Arizona. It's very few and far between, and Colorado, it's really constant, So I've often said that if I decided to go to college in Colorado instead of in Virginia, then I'd still be in college because I would have probably just gone to see shows all the time and never really made it to class. But
all right, well, let's break this down. You did go to Virginia. Was it the University of?
No.
Okay.
No, it was not. So yeah, I graduated from high school, and then I went off to Richmond, Virginia, to the University of Richmond, a small private school, and ended up being a political science major, journalism minor, but started getting into, politics and government, and, spent a couple summers in the Phoenix City Council office, spent a semester in the Virginia State Senate, and just starting to really get into politics. And needless to say, also started to get into marijuana. And so those two things converged.
And indeed, what was it in college that the poli-sci thing, got to you, or, did you grow up in a political household, or where did that kernel come from?
Good question. I certainly grew up in a what I would, I guess, consider a conscious household.
Okay.
Very conscious of social issues and things that were going on, and certainly was aware and informed, but never incredibly politically motivated or interested until college. And really not until even probably my second year of college. I mean, when I first got there, I assumed I had to go to business school. That was just my assumption.
Sure.
And I quickly realized that just was not my interest, and started to become a little more socially or interested in politics and what was going on in the world and whatnot.
Did you declare the major first, or did you have the internship first?
Well, I the internship came after. So, once I became a poli-sci student, then I was really starting to figure out what was I going to do. And, like a lot of college students, I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do to make a living, and how am I going to make money? And, city management, there's something. And
it looks like they do stuff, right?
Yeah. It's being an executive of a city seemed like an interesting concept. But, I spent a couple summers in the Phoenix City Council office, worked for a councilman there, great guy, and was able to really do some cool stuff.
What do you mean? I really do want to talk about every stop on the way.
Sure.
City council, I mean, that's, boots on the ground type stuff, right? What were you doing?
Yeah, well, I did a lot of dealing with constituents. It's a lot of it. And he was great. And in terms of handling constituents and casework and that type of thing, being responsive to constituencies, it was really very phenomenal. And, I really, what I did was a lot of the writing. I would write the responses to these people. We would be writing letters constantly to everyone who was getting in touch. And then, they started to really give me some more interesting things to do. I would represent him on a task force regarding child drowning, which is a very, very big issue in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And so he represented the district that has the highest rate of drowning, or at least at the time, the highest rate of child drownings in the country.
Is it because of pools?
Yeah. Right. And that's the whole thing is, it's a matter of pools. The way that Phoenix came about is people moved there and they built every house with a pool. And then as areas become a little more run down, what you start to have are, people with lower incomes moving into them, and they don't take care of the pools. Pools become green. You can't see to the bottom. People couldn't afford fences. So, there are a lot of factors. This is the stuff I learned while doing, being on this task force. And, but it was, very interesting. Got to even do some speech writing and stuff like that. And, and I actually was offered a job when I finished college, my senior year, and it was really, a very difficult decision because I thought that this seemed like what I should do. I did my internship, and now I'm supposed to go on to work there. And they knew that I wasn't interested in just being like in the council office and doing the constituent work. And they basically said, listen, this is a new councilman. He's a young guy. He's got a lot of political aspirations. So just, ride it out for a couple years and he'll probably want to move on and you'll be there.
Yeah.
And I just ultimately just decided I didn't want to do it. And it turns out that council member was Greg Stanton, who's now the mayor of Phoenix.
Okay.
So they were right. Yeah, exactly. But I was also right because I'm very glad that I didn't do that. I instead decided to look for something and managed to convince the Marijuana Policy Project to hire me for a very brief period of time, and it really just snowballed from there.
It absolutely did. Let's make sure to talk about the state senate, though. You mentioned it, summer internship. Any lessons learned there? Because it does sound like for the city council, that's where you got your kind of bona fides almost. That's where you learned how to do most stuff at a basic level.
Yeah, ultimately, I was able to learn quite a bit during the city council in terms of writing and, dealing with people at a professional level. Mm-hmm. And it was in the Virginia State Senate. I was able to work there for a session for a state senator. She was the Democratic whip and a really great lady. And she also was the champion in the state for protecting reproductive rights. Mm-hmm. So that's a very interesting position to be in Virginia. So I got to be the person that opened the mail and read the emails and responded to all this stuff in a very interesting environment, a very interesting time, and certainly got to learn quite a bit there and learn a little bit about the legislative process. I've generally never been much of a legislative process guy.
Right.
I'm frustrated by government in terms of the whole process and committees and
I'll do the
two
front
chambers
end.
And this and that, and it's just some of it to me just feels tedious and antiquated. I mean, and I respect it and I understand why it's needed and why it's there, but it's just never been for me. So I was able to work there and get that experience. That was great. Again, got to do some writing, some speech writing, mm-hmm. prepare some remarks for her, and put out some, starting to put out some press releases and that type of thing. And I actually, right around that time, also managed to have an internship in the press office for the Arizona Attorney General, which was very brief, as for a summer, just for a couple months. But I did again get to do some media outreach, and certainly that was a great experience. That has paid off.
Absolutely. So now you've got your state senate stuff, you've got your city council stuff, you've even got an attorney general type thing happening. Which came first? The equalization stuff, the MPP stuff, was that overlapping?
Well, I guess, I had gotten into marijuana in college, so I had an interest in the issue. And what's funny is, I remember MPP having an internship program that I looked at, I think maybe my sophomore year, the summer of my sophomore year, I was considering it, but, it was like, I can't do that because then I don't want that on my resume and the standard,
mm-hmm.
That's
standard.
I obviously got over that after a little while, but I really got into marijuana policy, I should say, after being, subjected to harassment by law enforcement and whatnot when I was in college. And
so how so? I mean, it doesn't really matter where it was on the scale of things, but take us through what did happen, or if it was more than one occasion, what happened on multiple occasions.
Well, basically, I was just, part of, I got pulled in with a bunch of other people on what really struck me as a routine operation, which is really, one of the eye-opening things here is that at the end of my freshman year in college, it was finals week or just about to be finals week. And I get a phone call from the police on campus saying, you've been subpoenaed by a multi-jurisdictional grand jury and this drug task force, and you're going to have to appear in, testify sometime in like July. And I was just like, well, sorry guys, I live in Arizona, so I won't be here this summer, but have a good, hearing.
Enjoy.
Yeah. And they said, no, it's not really how it works. If you don't show up, you're going to jail. And so you better be there. And I said, well, I really can't make it, which I guess was code for I don't want to tell my parents that I need them to help me fly back out here to testify because I'm suspected of being, involved in marijuana dealings on campus. And ultimately I wasn't really even suspected of dealing marijuana or even using marijuana. It was just a matter of an investigation taking place where I was suspected of being someone who had information about where marijuana on campus comes from and like what's going on. And, basically they said, well, come in and you can talk to us and we'll see if we actually need you. And, at the time, this didn't even really crystallize my mind as like, this is like, a shakedown. I mean, like this is basically, they're looking for people to rat people out. And it just, they were just like, well, come in and you say what you know. And if we decide, we don't need any of the information, then we'll let you go. And I was like, okay. So, they made it miserable though. And they're like, oh, if you do that, you've got to be here at 6 a.m. And this is like during finals of my freshman year. So I'm freaking out already.
Right.
And I haul my ass down there and, I didn't bring an attorney, which probably helped. I'm not in any way endorsing the idea of not having an attorney, but I do know some of these other guys. It's basically me and like 20 other guys who, quite frankly, people would know as like, yeah, those are the guys that smoke weed on campus. Like, sure. You know them. And there's basically, and some of them who had, had some issues in their past did show up with an attorney and they immediately were told, you got to show up at the hearing. And, we don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah. Do not pass go. Do not collect.
Yeah. Me being, naive young kid who showed up without an attorney, they're like, oh, come in, sit down, we'll talk to you. So, I just basically, where do you get marijuana? The parking lot at concerts, usually. I was like, friends, whoever happens to have it, quite frankly, there's quite a shortage here. You guys are doing a hell of a job. It's really not fun. I just told them, it's like, honestly, we don't have like a dealer. I mean, I wish we did, but we don't. We just, if you can manage to find it anywhere, you are lucky in Richmond, Virginia. And so, they seemed satisfied with that. And they said, where do you use it? In my dorm room, with friends at their houses, whatever, like how much does it cost? Is it good? Is it bad? It was just fact finding. I mean, like who do you use it with? I was like, I think you know them. They're in the waiting room right now.
Just saw something.
Yeah, it's like I'm pretty sure you met them already, or you will be. But and we'd all talked about this ahead of time. Yeah. And they said, okay, well, we'll let you know, go on your way to your final. I remember I went and took a final and they said, well, we'll, call us after 10 a.m. and we'll tell you if the, prosecutor still wants to meet with you. And anyway, I, called and they said, we don't need you to be there. And I was like, fantastic. And ultimately that was that. And it's funny that, my senior year, so, 3 years later, I had to do like my big senior, big projects as a journalism student as well. And we had to do a big feature writing course and you had to do a big feature. And I did mine on this experience. And I went back and the cop who interviewed me actually agreed to meet with me again. And yeah, It's just what a shithead. I mean, this guy was just like, it was just like my freshman year in college, I didn't do very well. I mean, yeah, like a 2.5, 3.0, maybe 2.5. Yeah. I pledged a fraternity, just whatever.
Getting used to being in college.
And I also didn't take any classes in my major, whatever, for any number of reasons other than using marijuana. I didn't do great my freshman year. So at the time when I first went in there, they said, how are you doing in school? And I was like, I'm not doing as good as I thought I'd be doing. And they're like, well, see what happens, It's like, your listeners can't see my eye roll.
Yes.
And
there's a substantial amount of eye rolling.
There's eye rolling. There's my
displeasure.
I like to imitate Southern police officers, but anyway, this guy Buddy Norton, I remember. So anyway, I went back there a few years later. The guy's still there, and I was like, I'm doing a story. I'm just talking about this experience because basically I'd come to realize that all this is they find someone with marijuana, they bust them, they get them to rat on everyone they know who has anything to do with marijuana, and then they call those people in, and they just and they try to scare the hell out of them to see what they can find and work their way up. And, fortunately, nothing came of it. But anyhow, I was like, this is a really shitty practice.
Yeah.
And I want to find out more about it. So I did my little feature story on this. And
story or paper?
Well, it was like a news story. I mean, it was a journalism class. So you had to write like a feature, like what would appear in a magazine or something. I don't know.
Right. As the project, it's still a story. So you go back to Buddy.
I go back to interview this guy, I was like, and just asking him like, so like whatever happened with that whole thing? Like, do you guys do that often? Blah, blah, whatever. And he says, so how are you doing in class? And I was like, I'm actually, I've been like Dean's List like every semester ever since I last saw you, and he's like, slaps me on the arm. He's like, see what I tell you, give that crap up and you'll, do much better. And I was like, sir, I am consuming far more marijuana than I ever did at the time I met you. But, clearly it is not correlated with my academic performance. So, but it was just really, eye-opening. But that was really, what got me interested in this issue. I mean, it was like, and I hate to say that, I didn't care until it affected me, but that's just how it is.
That's what happens.
And a lot of people who are very active in this issue, whether it's professionally or just, as a volunteer, or it's because they got fucked with.
Yeah, absolutely. Aaron told a story, about what happened to him, when we interviewed him, and that Aaron Smith from the NCIA, and that helps inform, what you want to do. That's kind of why we have these conversations here, So obviously you have that experience and that ignites something in you, because it seems like you were just a kid kind of doing whatever. And then that happened and you're like, pardon my, fuck this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as I was, trying to decide what to do, the idea of working in advocacy and working on policy issues that I cared about was interesting. And, when I applied for jobs, I looked at other things too. I was, I remember I interviewed at Planned Parenthood. I interviewed at, a couple other places. What's really fascinating though, is that when I then look back on that experience side by side with an experience of mine in high school, the extent to which it applies to the work that I've then done is really fascinating. And, we haven't gotten into talking about SAFER and talking about that whole thing.
We will, absolutely.
We will.
Please tell that high school story, and then we'll go right into it. How about that?
Sure. Well, ultimately, I got into marijuana policy and have really spent my career in it focusing on this message that marijuana is safer than alcohol.
Indeed.
And
you wrote the book on it.
I co-wrote a book on it
with Steve Fox.
With Steve Fox and Paul Armentano. But ultimately, my experience is a amazing example, and I wish I could say that it was this experience that directly led to me like wanting to push that message. I didn't. It just maybe subconsciously, but when I was in high school, I was a senior. It was my just about to graduate. I went to a festival, a country music festival in Arizona with a bunch of high school friends, which, you don't even go to the music part. Not that I'm like an apologist for country music. I mean, quite frankly, some of it's all right, whatever. But it was going to a big field to get shit-faced.
Uh-huh.
And there happened to be country music playing nearby.
Is your point of view.
Let's just be honest about
Fair
it.
enough.
Called Country Thunder. One of the it's like the largest country music event in the country, whatever.
Yeah.
And basically just spend, a couple days drinking nonstop and what have you. And I overdid it. And I was, taken to the emergency room in an ambulance for, potential alcohol poisoning. I mean, it was a really bad situation. And I woke up in the hospital and, it's a kind of a funny story, but not funny at all.
but what do you mean? How do you?
Well, just like, I woke up and I look up and there's like, standard, like, I don't know, analog clock, not a digital, and it says like 9:30 or something. And I saw it and I was like, oh my God, like, man, it's like 9:30, it's nighttime. And they're like, oh, we looked in your wallet. Like we called your parents, they're on their way. And I was just like, that's kind of shitty. I'm 18 years old. I didn't think you could do that, but whatever. I mean, whatever. I mean, I don't have my car here. I'm in Mesa, Arizona. So I'm like in this random spot.
Ironically, Mason, Arizona.
Yeah. No, Mesa. MESA.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Close enough. But, I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'll sit here and wait. And
for my parents.
So I sit there for an hour and it's like now like, like 10:30 and I'm just like, what the hell's going on? So I asked to use the phone and I call my mom's cell phone and I remember like she answers, she goes, hey, how's it going? Like really just perfectly happy. I was like, going okay, where are you? And she's like, oh, we're just golfing. I was like, well, that's a strange thing to be doing at 10:30 at night. But now it's coming, like, it's only at this moment that I'm realizing it's the next day.
Yeah.
And it's the morning.
Yeah.
And apparently they did not call them. They just were mistaken. So I'm just like, oh, have a good round. See you later, Hang up the phone.
Remember to replace your divots.
So I get a cab and I go back to this festival. But, the point being that they're like, well, do you want us to call you a cab? And I said, I guess. And I went on my way. Now, in hindsight, if you are sold an illegal drug that nearly kills you and results in you being sent to the emergency room in an ambulance, there's usually law enforcement interest in such a situation.
Completely and totally.
But because it was just alcohol, there was none. I mean, it was just a kid being a kid, whatever, they take you to the emergency room. And I'm not saying like, I wish I was punished, but just, in hindsight, like, wow, that's how we are about alcohol in the society, that it's no big deal, I guess.
Right. And you almost died.
And I almost died.
Right.
And then I went to college and upon being suspected of using marijuana in my dorm room, a multi-jurisdictional drug task force was investigating me. And that means that this is a task force of law enforcement officials from the DEA down to the local and campus police.
Right.
Who are now engaging in this large-scale investigation to determine where I might have come across marijuana.
We think.
Which had not hurt me at all. And that's crazy. And that's the exact type of thing that we were talking about. So when we started Safer and we were talking about having policies and laws that really steer people toward drinking and away from using marijuana, and like I started to think, damn, like that's absolutely been my case, And I mean, I was in a fraternity in college. We would have school sanctioned parties with tons of kegs and there would be police officers who were like standing in front of the party to like make sure that, everything's going okay. And like, and that is just how it is. But if you want to sit in your dorm room and, watch Alice in Wonderland with Dark Side of the Moon playing and smoke some pot, then you're going to get completely,
Yeah.
you know,
You're not allowed to do that.
yeah,
That's-
and so yeah, in hindsight, it makes perfect sense, and that I would get into this, and that this would be a message that resonates with me.
So you mentioned Steve as your mentor. He's who put us in touch personally. And when did you meet him? When had you already graduated from college? Were you at MPP? Where was it?
I had finished college, and I was looking for a job.
Yeah.
You know, stewing over like not taking this job at the Phoenix City Council and trying to find a job. And I applied for one at MPP, which was based in Washington D.C. And I was just squatting with friends, and they basically didn't have, when they got back to me, because I was very vigilant about, following up and whatnot. And, I'm a good job candidate, quite frankly. And, I was like, what's the deal? And they said, well, you know what? We actually hired someone for that position, but we do see you're from Arizona. We're running a campaign out there to highlight this member of Congress who's been voting against medical marijuana. Would you go out there for like a couple weeks? And I was like, well, as long as you bring me back, I'm sure, I'll stay with my family. They live right there. Fine. So they hired me. So, they called me in for an interview. Yeah. And so I went up to DC, and I go in, I'm in suit and tie and everything. And Steve is the one that interviews me, because he was the federal, he was the head of government relations at MPP. So he was lobbying in Congress. And,
right.
And it was an interesting interview. I mean, I don't remember all of it, but, I remember him saying, so what do you graduated in May, and now it's like August or September. Like, what have you been up to the last couple of months? And I was like, well, to be quite honest, I made a bunch of t-shirts, and I've been selling them at Fish and Dead shows for the last, couple months. And, his response was, really interesting. So did you design them and have them made? And, he clearly was intrigued by the idea of, being able to spread a message through, that type of thing. And which is something that Safer really ended up doing and pushing lots of merch t-shirts and that. Yeah. But, he had shown an interest in it. I was like, well, yeah. And I was like, what was it? I was like, a Steal Your Face Grateful Dead skull with an upside down marijuana leaf in it. And it's the trick was the upside down leaf. No one ever sells something with an upside down leaf. Yeah, but this is the conversation. But ultimately, whatever. I'm sure we talked about the serious stuff too and whatnot. And then and I was hired, and so I went out to Arizona. And later on, Steve would tell me that he thought I was he's like I thought you were a young Republican because I wore a suit and tie. And right. It was kind of funny. Fooled him. But so that was the first time I met him, and they sent me out. I went to Arizona, and it was during the primaries, and the person who was running the show out there for that was a guy named Aaron Houston, who is he was at the time the field director for the Marijuana Policy Project.
Senator now, right?
Aaron Houston?
No.
Aaron Houston, well, he was the field director for MPP. Yeah. Then he became the director of government relations for MPP. Then he became the director of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Right. Then he went, he's now doing some work, at least last I had spoken with him, some work related to the marijuana industry. I'm not sure what he's up to these days.
Fair enough.
But he's been involved in marijuana policy reform, drug policy reform for a long time. But so he was running it. And then the other guy who was there, who was kind of coordinating some of the field stuff, was this young, bald, recently graduated law student named Brian Vicente, who was a fellow. He was doing MPP's fellowship program in Colorado. He was doing some medical marijuana work, but they were kind of doing an all hands on deck. So he was out in Phoenix, and he had just finished law school. And so that's when I met him. And then, interestingly enough, Don Murphy, who's now working at MPP, he's a former Maryland state delegate. He also was out there in Arizona because he was an MPP fellow at the time, I think, or I don't know if he was an MPP fellow or a grantee. Anyway, kind of random.
Kind of group of all-stars out there, right?
Yeah. But like while they were in the minors, So anyway, so I did that for a couple weeks during the primaries, and that ended. And, Steve asked me if I wanted to run the show up in another district in Arizona. Yeah. in Flagstaff. And so I said, sure. So I went up there. Everyone else moved on. They went to New Mexico to mess with Heather Wilson, a different member of Congress. I went up to Northern Arizona and lived up there for a couple months and ran a campaign up there, messing with a guy named Rick Renzi, who's now in federal prison.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and what was interesting is like, during those campaigns, they were based around really just, bird dogging these guys and, having signs all over town that say, don't vote for ruthless Rick Renzi. He wants seriously ill people to go to jail and, just really making life miserable for them and being at all their events. And,
You're kind of a master at this. I do want to kind of focus in on this. Where did you learn this ability? Is it along the way here?
Well, these were my formative years. I mean, this was actually very, very like noteworthy in that, like, I, really, and I would say that was probably like, working with Aaron Houston and working with Steve, but like, just, starting to be okay with the idea of putting yourself out there, like being the one person with a sign or the one person who stands up and interrupts their event or their press conference or what have you. And, that was definitely my first experience really doing that kind of thing.
When did you realize that you actually had a talent for it? in all seriousness,
I don't even know. I mean, it just came naturally. Yeah. Being a loudmouth just comes naturally to me.
So, because I feel like this is a good time to just take a left and do the story that has you challenging John Hickenlooper and Pete Coors, right? So we noted that you wrote the book literally with Steve Fox Safer. Fantastic. People can pick it up on Amazon still to this day. And we'll get through to how you got to Colorado after Arizona. But just to focus in on that for a second.
Well, it's just the idea of publicity stunts and getting a message out there. And so, that was a particular.
So this is when it was Mayor Hickenlooper,
I mean,
right?
And what's funny is that incident that stunt has raised far more attention and gotten far more discussion years after the fact than it did at the time. At the time, it really didn't get a ton. I mean, it got a little bit, but it was really not. I wouldn't say it was a widely, massively successful stunt. And
set the scene for us, and understanding that nothing really happened, but we still read about it.
Well, things happened. I mean, it was just it was in 2006. It was during the first statewide initiative we did in Colorado to make possession of marijuana legal for adults. And it was really a strategic campaign. It was not run with the expectation of winning in any way.
Right.
The whole idea was just to really get a lot of attention and to get people to think about marijuana and the fact that it's safer than alcohol. And everything we did was based around that message. And, when you're not concerned about winning, you can do a lot more things than when you're really trying to make sure you get your 50.1%. So, we had no doubt that we would lose. So challenging, our mayor at the time and Pete Coors to a drug duel made perfect sense.
So the challenge challenge was
ultimately, it all starts with Mayor Hickenlooper, now Governor John Hickenlooper in Colorado, who's been the longtime foil, nemesis, what have you. At this point now, I would almost even say potential ally as he's started to evolve on the issue, and that's great. And but
now he's got tax revenue on his side.
Sure,
right?
Sure. But he had already started to oppose our efforts, and so he had come out against our initiative, and we wanted to, he was the owner of a brew pub, the largest brew pub in the state, and he had made a fortune selling alcohol, and we wanted to highlight that. And we're kind of jumping ahead because when we'd already had our first interactions with him. This is after that. But we decided that we would challenge him to a drug deal. And I don't remember exactly how the idea came up. I have no doubt it was Steve's idea. And, you know, yeah, we threw Pete Coors in there because we didn't want it to, we wanted to be bipartisan. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we wanted to have like a Republican, because the whole thing, I mean, the thing with Hickenlooper was, and this was at that time in 2006, as well as when he first came out against us in 2005, you know, he was incredibly popular. These days, you know, he barely won re-election. And you know, it's a lot harder to be popular when you're, you know, in a partisan office like governor,
Sure.
You know, in a purple state than it is being a nonpartisan official in a democratic city.
Right.
So, you know, I'm not necessarily saying anything about, you know, him now, but at the time, he was incredibly popular, and he was, you know, called the Teflon mayor. I mean, you know, the guy could do no wrong. And when we first started criticizing him in 2005, we got a lot of crap for it. And people said, you cannot talk negatively about John Hickenlooper.
Why do it? Right.
Well, it's just, you know, you're going to piss off Democrats.
Yeah.
Like, people are not going, you know, they're going to be turned off, and you just can't do it. And we just said, you know, we don't care, because we know that it'll get attention. And quite frankly, the guy's making a fortune selling booze and wants to keep punishing adults who are using a less harmful substance. Why do we care?
He's the perfect person.
He was a great foil.
Yeah.
And so, so in this chapter, we challenged him to a drug deal, and we really hammed up. You know, it was like at high noon in front of the courthouse. His office is in the Denver City County building, which is a courthouse.
Right.
So high noon in front of the courthouse. You know, of course, he like wasn't around and didn't show up and whatnot. We had no expectation he would, but
the cameras did.
The point was made. Well, the thing is that, yeah, you know, in terms of the news coverage, what I do recall, there was one TV story, and there was also an editorial in the Aurora Sentinel, mm-hmm. which began by talking about how it was a, you know, juvenile stunt and, you know, whatever, immature, blah, blah, blah. But then it went on to talk about how it made a good point. And it was really like, you know, for me, I was like, wow, like, I you know, this is like a great example of what we're talking about. Is like, you know, we are making them talk about this.
They're shitting on you, but telling you that you had a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I'm okay with them saying that you know, that I suck, but they're also talking about how we're making a good point and so on. And
just to make sure that we cover it, it was you would smoke a joint for every beer that either of them drank.
Yeah, we said that I would take a hit of marijuana.
Take a hit, okay.
Yeah, I would take a hit of marijuana for every sip of beer or
right.
you know, beer they drank.
Right.
And we brought a bunch of Coors beer. We brought a bunch of Wing Coop, which was at the time his brewery's beer. And then meanwhile, we had been having the main opponent during that election year was our former Attorney General, John Suthers. And he had recently been, I was doing a debate with him on the radio where, you know, they were having trouble, at least I assume, they were having a hard time dealing with our argument about marijuana being less harmful than alcohol. And, you know, how do they justify their position that it's okay to drink and not use marijuana? And he had come up with this talking point about alcohol only being sub-intoxicating. So like marijuana is bad because you're automatically intoxicated when you use it. Whereas alcohol, you know, you can have a couple drinks and you're not intoxicated, you're just sub-intoxicated.
Sub-intoxicated.
And so, you know, which I remember Steve had a great line. So that's like saying you're sub-pregnant. It's like, you know, you may not be 9 months, but it's in there. You know? But anyway, knowing that had, you know, he had been using that line, we actually made the conscious decision to buy a little 4-pack of like bright pink wine coolers and bring them. And so we had this big setup in front of the City County building with, you know, all the mayor's beer and all the Coors beer, and then this little 4-pack of wine coolers. And it was just in hopes that maybe someone would ask why they're there.
Yeah. Because
they were out of place. And sure enough, you know, a few reporters did show up, and one of them asked, "What's up with the wine coolers?" And we said, "Those are for Attorney General Suthers, should he choose to join us and get sub-intoxicated." And I remember the the Durango Herald. I remember, and I wonder if he remembers, because he's still around. Joe Hanel was the reporter covering Denver for the Durango Herald, and he did a big story. And the quote that was like pulled out and highlighted and really blown up was like, the wine coolers are for our Attorney General in case he chooses to join us. And it was just great.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was a fun one.
Just literally taking a hammer and hammering the nail directly through the 2x4.
Yeah.
That's essentially, how can we, most directly make this point using his point? Mm-hmm. Is that the magical kind of theory? I'm looking at you say, yeah, sure, maybe that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I don't know. I've just learned as I've gone, and I've learned a lot from Steve, some directly, and some just indirectly, and from the experience.
So we are skipping around, and we are skipping some stuff because we only have a certain amount of time. So I'm trying
that's okay.
You know what I mean? Trying to get as much as we can in. But in terms of writing that book, how important was it to have it as in book form in order to argue the case then after?
Well, I'll say Steve and Paul are largely responsible for the book. So, my contribution to the book was definitely minimal relative to theirs.
Okay.
And, it was always something that Steve wanted to do because this was Steve's idea, this whole theory of focusing on the relative safety of marijuana compared to alcohol. And, he wanted to get that message out there, and he wanted people to agree that it was the message to get out there. Mm-hmm. And so he was very interested in conveying that. And then, of course, Paul is just an encyclopedia. And, I have no doubt is the most knowledgeable person in the country, if not the world, when it comes to the research and the science surrounding marijuana. The guy's just brilliant. And, they really did most of it. And I really just contributed in terms of like some of the stuff about, how to get involved and what you can do and what we did. And, in the end, when we talk about the campaign and safer getting started and so on and so forth. So, I always, don't, want to avoid taking more credit for the book than I deserve.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Only partial credit.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's then talk about Amendment 64. Let's talk about the campaign because that's where we are in the conversation. And if you don't mind, I'd love to do another one of these to cover the holes that we missed along the way. But Amendment 64, you get to Colorado, you were in Arizona, you're doing the safer stuff, you're, kind of making a name for yourself with Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Coors, no less. When did the campaign start up, and what was your involvement?
Well, what's interesting, is that the campaign for Amendment 64 started in January of 2005 when I moved here. The grant application that I wrote to MPP to come out here literally, said the mission is to fertile the ground. I think we might have used the phrase fertile the ground or lay the groundwork for a statewide ballot initiative to tax and regulate marijuana like alcohol. And it might have said like in 2008, 12 or 16 or, something like that. It literally said the goal is to start now to build up to that initiative. And everything we did was always with that in mind, was just building public support. In terms of the actual campaign, the actual initiative for Amendment 64, it really got going, I would say, in January of 2011 was, I believe, when we started the drafting process, and that process lasted for a few months. It was definitely very comprehensive and involved a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders. And ultimately, I think we ended up submitting it sometime in the spring, and then we began the signature drive in the summer, something like that. I can't really remember. But the petition drive ended up taking a little longer than we had hoped because we ended up having to go back and cure our petition,
right? Which
is bullshit.
Steve covered it. I got you.
Yeah?
Go on. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, no one likes to be told that they didn't. We definitely had more than enough signatures. But anyhow, we went out and collected more just to prove a point. And so, we made it on the ballot, and we really were able to have a basically entire year during 2012 to get our message out there. And, we built a strong coalition, and, we certainly didn't have remotely as many endorsements or elected officials on board as our opponents, but we definitely did everything that was theoretically possible at the time.
And you spoke about earlier campaigns which you knew you weren't going to win, simply to make sure that the message was out there and moving forward. When was it along the way that you thought that you actually had a shot here? And different people have given us different answers. Basically the last maybe week is when folks kind of
well, in terms of like thinking it's going to win, it was like the last week,
right.
But in terms of thinking it could win, that was the whole time.
You did think it could win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
When we wrote Amendment 44, which was in 2006, the initiative was one sentence. It was all it did was make possession legal, and all it did was add 5 words to the existing law. The whole thing was written just to keep it simple so that we could focus on talking about whether it's okay or not for adults to use marijuana. We didn't want to be distracted by regulatory stuff and taxes and this and that.
Right.
And we did not talk about tax revenue. We didn't talk about anything like that. So in this case, we're talking about a full-blown initiative with a lot of details, and that's because it was written with the expectation that it could win.
Yeah.
So, I think that everyone knew that it could win. It was really at the very end that it was becoming clear that it would win.
Mm-hmm. So the whole time you think it can win, the last week you think it will win. Along the way, what were the tent poles, of movement?
Well, it was really a matter, of how many people, getting more and more people were getting involved. By the end of this thing, we ended up having a sizable campaign staff. It just grew over the course of that year and a half, 2 years.
In terms of snowball of people, basically.
We started out with a few people, and then some people just contributing. Brian had started his law firm with Christian, and they had some folks working for them. They had some interns that were helping out, and then those people started getting more and more involved until the point where they were really working full time too. And so we hired other people, had some other people contracted and whatnot. So it really just grew as we did more and more, and it was a full blown effort, and that was what was needed. It was a tough fight here.
Get into that. When you say it was a tough fight here, in retrospect, it's easy for us, the people that were not part of the campaign, to see it as inevitable.
Yeah, it was far from inevitable, and we had a very, very tough fight here. And I will say that the fight was very tough in Alaska, last year. I was very involved in that campaign. The fight already is very tough in Arizona and Maine. The opposition is really catalyzed right now. Like, they're really organizing, and there's a lot of it out there. Washington, I don't think had to deal with as much opposition. I think they ran a great campaign. They ran the campaign that they needed to run, but it was very different. They didn't really have much in the way of organized opposition. They had a ton of endorsements from people within the establishment, elected officials, and so on. But no one was really opposed, other than there were some folks in the marijuana movement who were opposed based on certain elements of that law that people didn't like. So that I think that the most money raised against them was like $17,000, something like that. That was raised by medical marijuana advocates who were upset with provisions in that law.
Yeah.
Our opposition, I think, spent like $800,000.
Yeah.
And we're talking about every law enforcement agency and all the district attorneys and all the the attorney general, the governor, all these people out in Washington were neutral. They didn't support it or oppose it, but their governor didn't oppose it, their attorney general didn't oppose it. It was just for us, everyone was against it. And, not only that, they were pretty actively against it. I mean, Hickenlooper was, as the governor, was doing radio ads with Bill Ritter and Bill Owens, the prior two governors. We definitely had an uphill battle, but, in the end, we managed to get our message out there. I mean, getting endorsements from law enforcement and elected officials doesn't go very far, or at least nearly as far enough as they would have hoped. Yeah. Because people already assume that they're against it.
Yeah. And it helps when you've got the people, right? Let's talk about, in these last few minutes, the current lay of the land, right? So we're here June 2015. What needs to get done by November 2016, Mason Tvert?
So we've got several initiatives that are likely to be on the ballot in coming up here. One of them already is in Nevada. Mm-hmm. There's an initiative that is already qualified that will appear on the 2016 ballot. Very similar to Colorado's. And then we're currently, MPP is supporting initiatives in Arizona and Maine, and those are in the process of the petition drive. So right now it's a matter of collecting the signatures that are needed to get on the ballot, mm-hmm. and that's never fun, certainly never cheap. So that's going on right now. Mm-hmm. Drafting the initiatives in Massachusetts and California is currently taking place. So they're even earlier in the process there. And once those initiatives get drafted, then the petition drives for those will take place, and then those will get on the ballot. And throughout all of this, we also need to be really starting to build a presence and, getting the message out there in those states.
We talked to Betty at SSDP. She mm-hmm. said she's ready to go. She's mm-hmm. got the boots on the ground. What else can be done besides or in addition to activating the SSDP force?
Well, I think that we really just need to be fostering a public dialogue about the issue and doing it in a way that's going to get people thinking. And, one of the greatest things that we did in Colorado that I'm really hoping that we'll be able to do in these other states, and we did it in Alaska, is really focus a lot of attention on mobilizing people to reach out to those closest to them. We launched a whole campaign in Colorado called Talk It Up, mm-hmm. and really spent a lot of time encouraging people to talk to their friends and their family members, particularly their older family members, their father-in-law, their aunts, uncles, grandparents, and just like letting them know that this is the right thing to do. This is a good initiative. This is necessary. It will be beneficial. And because we're confident that those are the types of conversations that are really going to actually have an impact. You can run TV ads, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I think ads are important. But think about how many times you see an ad or you get handed a flyer and that you base your opinion on it. Not many. I mean, it might reinforce an opinion you already have, but we generally base a lot of our opinions on what we see and hear, with people we know. And, when you know that your best friend says, listen, I believe in this is the right thing to do, this is why it's done right, and so on and so forth, that really makes you think about it a lot more, especially when it comes to being your grandchild or your sure. family member says, like, listen, I know that you have some thoughts about this, but I really want you, to think about why I care about this and explain it and so on. That's powerful. And then that's what really changes minds.
Or it stops my epileptic seizures.
Yeah.
That also helps.
Absolutely. It's really just a matter of getting people to talk to each other. And we saw success. In Colorado, I think that some exit polling found that, something around like 13% of voters said that they heard something positive about the initiative from a friend or family member. And I think in Washington, it was only like 4% or something. And,
right.
We had made a concerted effort to do that, and it appeared that it worked. Can't say for sure whether it was what helped us win or not, but I think it's really the right way to go. So we hope to do a lot of that.
Excellent. We're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to doing what we can to support you. Final question. I usually ask two questions, and they are: what has most surprised you in cannabis, and what has most surprised you in life? I feel like for you, there's no way to separate the two. So, have at it if you can. But what has most surprised you in cannabis?
Oh, well, I guess the nothing surprising these days. I mean, I would say that, just the rate at which things have been moving and the exponential growth and support. And I don't know that it's necessarily even surprising. It's what we would have expected. And I guess in hindsight, it's not surprising, but it's certainly been interesting to see how quickly things have moved forward. Otherwise, yeah.
I love it. What's most surprised you? I'm not surprised.
I'm jaded. Yeah, the thing is, people say, like, did you were you surprised at this past? No, not really. I mean, we've been like everything. Wow. What's crazy is that everything happened gradually from 2005 to 2015. It was a very steady, gradual growth and support. Movement, progress. And so it wasn't, if we'd have won in 2006, would it have been a huge surprise? Yes, it would have.
That would have been, yeah. Right.
But was it a huge surprise when we won in 2000? Well, no, it wasn't. I mean, it just, because we were more and more, it became realistic that it would happen. So, but what's crazy is that while it was this, gradual change, it's the fastest change in support for marijuana legalization that's ever occurred before.
Yeah.
So
at least the last 80 years.
Well, yeah, exactly. So, even the federal government took them a good 10, 15 years to get everyone in the country scared.
Right.
But yeah, no, it's just, we played the long game and it was shorter, it made it shorter. We didn't just go out there and try to make marijuana legal in 2006. We went out there and tried to educate people about marijuana being safer than alcohol in 2006. And that was looking at it big picture instead of, an immediate win.
Right.
But we ended up winning more immediately than really ever before.
And so now you get to work on these other states.
Yeah.
So I'll let you get back to work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mason Tvert, thanks so much.
Thank you.
So there you have it, Mason Tvert. Really important voice in the space. Very pleased to have spoken with him. Looking forward to the next time we have an opportunity. You heard it all. Well, no, you really didn't hear it all. You heard some of it. And we'll do our best to have yet another conversation.